Hello, and welcome all. I'm Doc BGA, and welcome to Brotherhood Builds, where I go through and show you my 3D prints, commission work, epoxy work, and all sorts of other crafts. These projects range from D&D terrain to physical professional logo work. This definitely isn't my first project and absolutely will not be my last. However, I want to preface this by saying I'm in no way an expert, but I want to show others on how I go through my projects and crafts. I want to get you thinking on how you can do yours, or help you learn from my mistakes along the way. For this episode, I had the honor of being commissioned to do a 3D logo for Iron Smithy and his community, The Forge. Iron Smithy currently streams on Twitch 7:30 to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday through Sunday. Please be sure to click the link below, stop by, and check out his amazing content and his fantastic, warm, and inviting community. Now, without further ado, let's get into the project. The project is a 3D printed logo, painted, backlit with red LED lights, encased in epoxy, and mounted on a wooden base. I threw the logo into Photoshop, and with the logo as is, it would have proven difficult for how I would run the LED lights. Numerous thin shapes would have shown the wires when running LEDs, and so with his permission, I inverted the logo into a square shape. This allowed the logo to be in the negative space, letting the red light come through when lit up. Once rendered, I threw the file to Cura, sliced, and began printing on my Ender 3 with PLA filament. The whole job took roughly 15 hours to print. Once the print job was complete, the pieces needed a good sanding to remove most of the ridges, extra plastic bits, and burrs left over from me clipping it. I used a spray paint primer filler to level out the piece and brought it into my office to start the final paint scheme. As you can see, I had printed out the logo at the size of the piece, so I had a template to lay the pieces on. From there, I used painter's tape to keep the pieces from floating about too much as I painted. I flipped it over and taped the other side to allow me to paint the front face of the project. The use of the tape will be very important during the epoxy phase. I used a matte black to give the base coat, making sure to cover every bit of the front. The most important area would be the front, as that was the focus point of the project. The back and the sides would properly show the logo, so I wasn't concerned as much for those. His logo is black and would be just flat black, but I felt something was missing. I came back in with some dry brushing. I wanted to give a worn, rusted metal feel to the piece. I first hit it with a slight steel gray, making sure to randomly hit areas, as this would make the details of his logo sing. After that, I came through with a dry brush of rust brown orange to hit random areas and directions. The finished product came out amazing. Once it sat and dried for a while, I gave it a rub to check and see, covered the front in painter's tape once more, and flipped it over to the back. It is now time for the LED strand to be affixed to the back. For this, I am using hot glue to tack on the strand where I want it to lay. Once it's in epoxy, I don't want it to move, so the hot glue tack is used to make sure it's not going to be going anywhere. At first, I was going to layer the lights from the top to bottom, but it made sense for me to allow the lights to organically weave in and around the logo itself. I felt this provided the best lighting when trying it out. The LED strand was a 7-foot of 20 LED lights. Fairy lights, as they're also known as. These have worked so well on many of my other projects, so using them here just made sense. Working my way through the logo, I tried to avoid letting the wires be exposed through the negative space to better hide them, so I twisted the wires into bunches to allow for better wire management and to conserve space. I made sure to test the strand every once in a while to make sure I did not damage it in any way. I tacked the base of the piece with the last bit of strand. I intend to clip the last bit of strand off, as when I go to do the epoxy, it will be easier to run the wire through the back instead of the whole entire battery pack. Now that I have taped the front, it will be easier to keep all the bits together, such as the R and a few others in the anvil. I make sure that they are all lined up once again, knocking a few pieces around with a knife and small screwdriver to get the small spaces. I use Amazing Clear Cast epoxy, as I have the most experience with that. I know how to handle it. It's a 1-to-1 ratio mix, and I mix and pour a base coat on the bottom of the silicone tray. That will be the form for the whole piece. With the piece taped together, I place/slide the LED side down, allowing the epoxy to fill up those areas underneath. I use a heat gun to pop bubbles and push the epoxy around the open surfaces, underneath, and around the piece. Realizing I need more, I mix up another batch and pour it in. I had made a mistake accidentally and got some epoxy on the front of it, unfortunately. I know this will bleed through the tape, and I try my best to blow it off with the heat gun. This dries fairly quick, but I let it sit a full 24 hours before returning to mess with it further. After it is dried, I remove the tape to see what the damage is. Not too bad, but I will need to adjust my game plan. This spread onto several areas and filled in gaps of the piece. I use a soldering iron to remove some of the epoxy, filling the gaps, as there's so many bubbles in those, and it won't look right when completed. The light won't shine through just as effective as some of the other areas. The use of the soldering iron works very well. I've used this on several pieces, and it's really effective in removing some of the epoxy. Once done with the soldering iron, I clean off the piece with some water and a towel. This is to remove some of the epoxy pieces that were melted, and so that I can get a better idea as to what further I need to clean up. I do some picking with a knife, clean off once again, and then I throw down another coat of epoxy. This is the adjustment to the plan. I didn't have the idea of putting epoxy fully on the front, but due to the mistake of getting epoxy on the top of it, I need to make it look even. However, this will give a great protection on the piece later on. Once dry, I pop it out of the silicone form to inspect, and it looks very good.
covered the front of the piece with blue painter's tape once again to protect the piece from scuffs, marks, or scratches. Again, with the soldering iron, I go through and pick out the wiring from the epoxy. This is so that I can splice the wires back together for the lighting. This is pretty easy, and the back was easily cleaned up later on by some cutting of the base. The reason I did this was so that I didn't have to cut through the whole entire piece or potentially epoxy in the battery pack that was required to power the LED strand. Now, the base. I had some extra wood in my shop that would perfectly fit. I cut it down and began devising on how I'm going to get the groove in the wood with the tools I have on hand. I attempt to use my Dremel, but that doesn't seem to do what it wants, and I also try a drill bit to the same effect. I end up using a boring bit for my drill, and the result is a bit jacked up, I hate to say. But I was able to finish it out and make it look nice with a chisel and some sanding. Once the sanding was complete, I used a light stain that I had on hand. Once that was dry, I did a coat of poly to protect it, and then glued the base and the piece together with some E6000 adhesive. Everything came together amazingly. And this is the result of the work. I hope you liked this piece and the video of my work. If you want to see more, please be sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. I'm excited to show you more of what I have in store for my builds. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and Doc out.
To stop on. This is super awkward. I have black. Yeah, I'm done for the day.